Hi guys, it's Nic and Brian from London Real. Today we had Ben McLeish on from the Zeitgeist Movement UK.
Super intelligent cat. He gave us a bunch of fresh perspectives on the world and where it's headed.
It's an excellent hour. Check it out.
Check it out.
Welcome to London, the city we come from. London town and we go, play that Eden sound now. We go party all night long.
Hooah! Welcome back to London Real. My name is Brian Rose. With me is the host of the hour, Mr. Nic Gabriel, and joining us today is Ben McLeish, who is one of the prominent public speakers for the Zeitgeist Movement UK.
Thanks for having me, guys. Hello.
Welcome. Thanks for coming down. You know, I don't know if everyone of our listeners is familiar with the Zeitgeist Movement. I don't know enough about it, but I was wondering, for a complete newbie out there, if you could tell people how it got started, maybe some of the films that made it the movement it is, and where it is today.
Sure. Okay. So, I mean, a general description of what we are is, I suppose, a non-political sustainability movement that is trying to advocate a model of economics, a model of life, if you like, on Earth that is really sustainable, that has maximized the use of technology to free humanity, essentially. So how did it get started? Well, there was a film called Zeitgeist that came out in 2007. It was not actually originally a film. It was a sort of an art project, live art project by a New York filmmaker called Peter Joseph.
He used to perform it in New York, right?
Yes,
like
he
one man show or something.
He performed it over about 5 or 6 nights in Brooklyn. That's right.
Okay.
And it was just 2 big screens with video, and he did live percussion music and stuff like that, and he had his own voiceover, and it essentially gave a sort of a long perspective on 3 major big issues, all which relate to the idea of myth, hence the name Zeitgeist. Zeitgeist being spirit of the times, shared values of the day, those kinds of things. And it touched on religion and its possible astrotheological roots. It touched on 9/11 and the general history of false flag terror or conspiracies, if you like. And then finally it touched on banking and how the modern financial system works and the effects that it has, and all of that kind of stuff. And he just threw it up online afterwards because some people said, oh, I really like that, it'd be really good if it was online. So he sort of made an edit, shoved it online, it got 29 million views before Google stopped counting, and with no advertising, and him being absolutely nobody as well. And he started getting lots and lots of emails from people going, what do we do? What do we do about this system that seems to have inbuilt corruption, seems to be very much unfocused on the idea of supporting humanity, seems to divide human beings, seems to retard progress, seems to be based at its very core on outdated myths that really have a lot of damage when we come to trying to discover new ways of doing stuff or developing ourselves. And he sort of thought to himself, well, what do we do then? Because that was a big pile of complaining and anger and sort of personal venting. So he started doing some research, and amongst the research that he did, a chap called William Gazecki, who had done a film on a gentleman called Jacques Fresco, contacted him and said, look, you might be interested in this, and gave him a copy of his film, which is called Future by Design.
That's the resource-based economy guy.
Exactly.
Okay,
exactly.
Miles talked about him a little bit.
Yes, that's right. That's the way I want to contextualize him, basically. So Jacques Fresco, now, I think he's 94 now or something. He's getting on 93, 94. I do apologize if I'm inaccurate. He had been working for something like 70 years alongside the likes of Buckminster Fuller and even Albert Einstein, whom he met, in developing an idea of how you might use the scientific method to essentially power society, to enable society to grow and revise itself and not have any of these myths or kind of outdated ideas that are sort of kept there artificially almost by vested interests that are now doing quite well off those myths. The wonderful thing about science is it does revise itself deliberately. It quite happily says, we know this is now wrong, and we now have this following understanding. And that one day might well be disproved or added to. Think about the Higgs boson, for example. It's come out, and now suddenly we have a completely different understanding of mass.
What actually, just being a bit tangential here, but what did happen with Higgs boson? I know they were doing a big test last week.
Yeah.
Did they discover the particle, or
So this is an interesting area. Of course, I'm a layman in this, so I'm not gonna be 100% accurate. But they've been building this collider for many years, decades actually, and they've been smashing atoms together at extreme speeds to see if they could locate a predicted particle, a particle that would have to exist for the modern standard physics model to be correct. Imagine it a little bit like this: if you've got a 99 a 100-piece puzzle and 99 pieces are in the right place, there's one missing, there's certain things you can say about that. You can say, well, there's going to be a certain pattern on it because we can see from the picture that it would be probably something like this. We can tell what shape it's going to be, but we just can't find it. So what they then did, they managed to witness, I think it's the effects of this boson.
Okay.
Don't ask me what a boson is. I've looked it up and it's extremely complicated.
I think some kind of field that turns energy into matter, and then that's how the universe was built.
Yeah.
They're still not sure about it, but
That's
this guy
right.
Higgs boson, when he was 29, he proposed it, and everyone thought he was absolutely insane.
Yeah.
Which is crazy about theoretical physicists. I mean, like Einstein, he worked in a room with pieces of paper, like he didn't have all this equipment.
That's
he
right.
thought of these ideas. So.
That's right.
Yeah, I know, it's kind of crazy. So the big thing that Zeitgeist got noticed for were these very, very well-made films, right?
Because because then there was another film after Zeitgeist called Zeitgeist Addendum that said, okay, we've got all those problems. And they went through economics again. It said, look, this is what fractional reserve banking is. Every time you spend money from a credit card, that money is just invented into the system, and then you have to pay it back with interest that isn't created in the money supply. That's going to eventually contract ultimately when people keep doing that, and we've seen that. And in fact, when it was released, Addendum, it came out about a week after the big 2008 crash was publicly noticed. They said, whoa, Lehman Brothers had disappeared. So when that came out, people were like, how did they get that right? Did they make this film last week? You know, that kind of thing. So that got a lot of attention as well. And then in 2011 he made the final one, we think, called Zeitgeist Moving Forward, which is then a comprehensive scientific overview with sort of talking heads like Dr. Robert Zapolsky from Stanford and people like Richard Wilkinson from the Equality Trust. Sort of really combining it into like it's quite long as well. It's about 2 hours 40. Just saying, look, here from start to finish is the whole argument with all the supporting science that we have now, and this is what the model is, and this is what we mean by it. And thank you very much. So
it's an economic. So it rejects the modern banking system. It's a new economic proposal, and it also has some other like conspiratory theories or theories about 9/11 and government.
No, the thing is, when you're proposing a society based on actual real-world referent, if you like, then you don't need to keep hammering on about things like the conspiracy theories throughout history. We don't need to keep talking about the Gulf of Tonkin incident to be able to admit that our society is very corrupt. What's very important to say is where that corruption actually comes from. It does not come from a bunch of bad people, and if you just lock them all up, everything would be fine. There is a systemic product of a system that relies on restriction, on scarcity, on there being more value to restricting something than not. And the system will reward the people with the most money, ultimately. And so the inherent goal, therefore, is to just keep maximizing money over and over again. If you make that clear to people and say, listen, as long as you have a medium of exchange in society that requires people to earn money first, get into indentured servitude, and then buy, at usually a loss, anything that they need, because you need to make profit off it, which means you're spending more money than it would actually be worth for the sake of paying the person who's paying you. Ultimately, that's just going to produce more failed states, more restriction, a worse ability to look after people's health care, for example. The most extreme, look at the US healthcare system, which is entirely private.
See, I don't think capitalism is innately flawed the way you say it is.
No?
I don't. I think making a profit in a business is nothing wrong with that. And I think it does spur innovation to a certain extent. But before we go there, I kind of want to just go back on something you said there, because you said the conspiracy theory isn't these 10 guys that look like Dick Cheney that are making the world do this. You're saying it's a systemic, it's almost built in because of the way we reward people. And that's something I can sign on to much easier than I can when I hear someone talking about this conspiracy that happened here and it's big tobacco keeping marijuana out of being legal, although that might be true. But that's something I can buy onto a little bit more because the system is built to reward people differently as opposed to this evil empire of guys behind the curtains.
And if you think about it, it would make... I mean, it's so obviously self-debunked because many of the people throughout history who have been in control of a great portion of society, of course, they're dead now, but we still have these problems. In fact, they're much worse now, and it's new people. And often they're hijacked by people who weren't in that circle, who've just somehow made their way up and done that. So it's this pyramid to the top. It's the pyramid itself rather than the people on it. And it is about time that we got past all this. And the wonderful thing about having a society that really is attuned to the way that the Earth works as a system is that top-down model actually doesn't work very well anymore. It might have worked well when, for example, the railroads had to be built in the States. And you needed a massive capital, and you needed top-down, build it, and then we can do our business on it. But it doesn't work very well, for example, if you've got things like solar panels everywhere on every building contributing to a decentralized grid. Then a top-down model doesn't work well anymore. So we try and not just say, oh, get the people out of power because we don't like them having power. That's a really oversimplified way of saying it. What you have to say, and what we do say, is that based on the logic of where we need to go, how we need to engineer society so that people really are individual and free and have autonomy and have, you know, a sustainable element built into their lives, into their infrastructure, is that you don't need to have this ruling class of people anymore. And in fact, they themselves would live much better lives in a society that really focused on real human action, if you like.
So Ben, let me ask you, personally, I'm very much for what the Zeitgeist Movement stands for. But, you know, it's been going for what, 2 or 3, 4 years now?
Since end of 2008, August 2008, yeah.
What real world examples of change have you guys achieved? What can you tell us about that?
Sure. Well, the nice thing is that we aren't at the moment in a position to ourselves create, if you like, life-supporting systems, but other people are. And they're people who share the same values. They might not call themselves Zeitgeist, but we don't care. Yeah. I mean, the ideal end goal to all of this is that we get to a point where Zeitgeist is just dissolved, because we are now, the values have taken over, and you don't have to have us anymore. You don't need to have anybody advocating something that's now evident for everybody, and they go, yeah, we understand actually we need the environment and that there are correct ways of interacting with it. But so I'll give you some examples of people who have done it. There's a great couple of people called Open Source Ecology. Have you come across them?
No.
These guys have identified a set of machine tools that you need to be able to live off the land in a way that's admittedly very low tech, but it's actually very high tech compared to old style farming. And they've created, out of certain numbers of pieces, which are non-branded, they're essentially generic pieces, how to build a tractor, how to build an earth compressor that can compress bricks so you can build a house. And they've loaded all of this stuff onto the internet and said, cool, you know, we've got places where you can come and join us, and you can just get involved in the projects, develop these things, you know, make them better, and all the rest of it. So there's people like that. There's things like the transition movement that do transition towns, that are sort of experimenting with moneyless economies. We're really more of an educational resource for people who are unfamiliar with this whatsoever and think at the outset maybe that it might just be a bunch of hippies. We're there really to just provide as many educational materials as possible, and maybe media events that have a particular bent towards you know, social cohesion, all the rest of it, so that we can, if you like, make it fashionable to look at this stuff again. I mean, look at the way the word hippie has been co-opted by...
You just used it.
Yeah, well, absolutely, I did, exactly. In the terms of how people would think about this. That's been co-opted into a negative term because it runs against just normal life, you know, the normal life where we go to work and we shut up and we all dress in a particular way.
I mean, you know, you just said you kind of support what they're talking about, but if I wake up tomorrow and like I'm with the Zeitgeist movement, what are the 5 things I change about my life in order to be now part of this Zeitgeist movement?
That's a really good
question. What do I do? Was it where I bank? Is it who I vote for? What's the whole mentality change?
It's a huge question, man, and I certainly am not in a position to tell you what to do, but I'll tell you some of the things that I've done.
Okay.
And I'm also a very poor example of this because people do it in lots of different ways. For one, I don't vote. And I probably never will again, because when you vote, you're voting for people and not really for anything else. The general agenda is very much set very, very far in advance of any electoral system, actual voting process. And you can predict these things, and we've predicted these things in the past.
You're saying the candidates are chosen before you vote?
Oh, essentially. I mean, where did Barack Obama come from? I mean, he suddenly appeared, didn't he?
Who was he chosen by?
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, he very much was a banking president and is a banking president. And look at what has happened. I mean, he's a wonderful guy, right? He can write well. He can speak well. He's extremely intelligent. He has way more, you know, educational achievements than I do. And it's not down to him not being good enough. It's that that's just not his job, is to change stuff. I mean, otherwise he wouldn't have been put in there, right? Politics tends to function the following way. It tends to keep things the same. It tends to maintain things.
Okay. So that's your protest by not voting.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't see the point of it, you see.
Okay.
So
George Carlin once put it very well. We always say, well, if you don't vote, you can't complain. He said, well, if you do vote, then you can't complain, because what you've essentially said is, yep, that's enough for me to just be involved in this. That's my voice. And now whatever he does, I'll complain about if it's not the same as what he said. And if he does, then I'll consider it something that I voted for. You know,
What about in Germany right now? They have the Green Party, and they have this pirate party that they voted in Germany, and they're like these kind of internet pirate kids,
Yeah,
and they call it the Pirate Party, and now they have a few seats. I know it's only a few seats, but is that not a way in, or you just would rather not go down that route?
I do have a lot of respect for the Pirate Party. Pirat Piran, I think they're called in Sweden, aren't they? They're the
it
guys.
Sweden? Okay.
Yeah,
Pirate
originally.
Bay, right?
Wasn't sure.
But they know there's. I think Germany has a few there. So
Yeah,
I think
they
we've
do.
even got someone over here. I think the Pirate Party running as well.
Okay.
I respect that, because what they're doing is they're deliberately going for, you know, information needs to be free. What you call piracy, we call correct use of information. Those kinds of things. I think that there is some value to that.
They almost have no
So-
platform either, so it's kind of a zeitgeist thing, as in they're like, we're here to not tell you what to do, or we're here to ask the internet what to do. Or
That's interesting.
The libertarians in America have a similar one as well. I've been recently chatting to a libertarian, and he said that, you know, one of the things that's good about, for example, Ron Paul is that he's almost running to as a critique of what it means to run for president,
Right.
which
That's well
on
said.
one side sounds a little bit like hedging your bets, like, yeah, if he loses, it was all a protest anyway. But on the other side, I can understand that as well. And in fact, there was a guy called Scott Keller who ran for president in the US based on the Venus Project, which is Jacques Fresco's
Yeah.
essential entity for this. And a lot of people in our movement had problems with it. They were like, well, what happens when you get voted in? You're going to be beholden to all the people that funded you. Are you really going to be able to change anything, given the fact that we've already seen people like, you know, the heads of JP Morgan or similar, you know, Citibanks, essentially giving the president their marching orders, or at least, you know, the government their marching orders, or making certain things impossible through lobbying. But I do understand, and I will admit, that there is a certain amount of mind share to be won by a political, what becomes a political stunt, I suppose. It's just that I personally wouldn't do it, because I wouldn't want to involve myself. I don't think I could involve myself. I don't think I'm skilled enough.
So you wouldn't vote. That's one. I just want to get like two more things of what you would
Sure.
do to be the zeitgeist guy.
I think buying locally as much as you can is extremely important. I mean, for example, I'm very lucky. I mean, I travel a huge amount, so I can't really coherently buy all the time. Like, I'm at airports a lot, and a lot of that is just horrific waste that's been imported from so far. But when I live at home, there's a really great like farmers market that comes once a month. And once a month, I go down with like 6 of these big cloth bags, and I just fill it up with local produce. And the reason that's good is, for a start, you're not directly funding giant supermarket corporations anymore. The other one is that you, of course, take way less packaging home with you, and you can even take the old egg cartons and bring them back and use them again. And you're funding local, smaller guys, you know, even though, of course, you're still involved in the monetary stuff. You have to be at the moment. You can't just live a completely money-free life. Some people have managed, but unfortunately, how I live at the moment is it's impossible to do that. So, I mean, that's a good one, buying local. And from a health perspective, that's fairly good as well, I would say.
You know, Ben, there are more extreme activists that would argue that even doing things like recycling and making sure all the lights are switched off when you go to bed and not voting, those things aren't enough. And what we actually need is the entire system to collapse for us to be able to start again and to start afresh. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, do you think this system can be repaired and patched over, or do we need everything to be raised to the ground so we can start at square one again?
I can understand that point of view too, and I think that more extreme action than just what I outlined is absolutely needed. That's really why I spend most of the time that I have when I'm not having to work really putting stuff together and trying to get it to a wider audience in my small way. And if everyone tried to do that, that's quite good if you're okay talking. But in regards to the system collapsing, what do we mean by that? Do we mean the death of billions of people?
Yeah.
By any chance? Yes, we do. That
Billions.
for me, it would be, wouldn't it?
Billions?
Yeah.
Okay, like a third of the population of the world.
Well, okay, imagine the following. You go to...
Even hundreds of millions is a lot.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Don't get me wrong.
I think any amount is horrifically unnecessary if you knew that you could have avoided it. And that's not something I don't want. Could you live in a post-collapse world like that, knowing that?
I mean, it would be kind of exciting for a very short while, but you'd probably get very bored of seeing your fingernails glow in the dark and stuff pretty soon, right?
But it would be mayhem getting there as well.
Yeah.
People also forget what that means. Let's say, for example, that hydrocarbons start running short, which they might do. Then you don't have any more refrigeration. You also don't have any more transport, or very limited transport. You also have a lot of people who live in cities. You have a lot of people who live in cities in hot or cold climates. So you've got no AC, no heating. You've also got no food in the shops. And if they are in the shops, they're not being kept cool. which means mass starvation in about 3 days. We have about 3 days worth of food in the UK. That is it, right? So the collapse comes quickly when it comes like that. Now, I don't think it's this sort of doomsday, 2012 sort of bullshit, right? That it's going to be, people think very in a binary way. They go, everything's fine or everything's going to just end in one day, like, this kind of Ragnarok, end of days sort of thing. I think that's very much false, but it is an extremely precarious existence. We already live on a climatic knife edge on this planet anyway, and any major energy stresses are going to be quite significant with the way that we've ended up being so reliant on fossil fuels.
Something I had to accept, to quote someone you mentioned earlier, George Carlin, is he throws out a statistic: 98% of all the species that have ever existed on this planet are extinct.
In fact, it's higher than that. 99.9.
Wow.
Yeah, that's right.
So I've just realized,
because they're not needed anymore.
Yeah, well, maybe. But if it's our time to go, it's our time to go, right? If humanity needs this huge cleansing, then that's what we need, and that's what we're going to get.
Well, that seems rather fatalistic to me. For example, think about, don't you think there's anything that's worth at least trying to save? Isn't it worth maybe trying to live within nature's boundaries? In fact, Stephen Jay Gould put this very, very well once, where he said, people often say, well, the planet will replenish itself in 10 billion years. 10 billion years, we're not going to be around anyway, right? That's a long time. How could it ever matter to us that it's going to be fine in 10 billion years? However, we could sort of look at nature, Mother Nature, as he calls it, this way. We say, well, she isn't required to look after us, but we can at least not, cut her and make her bleed slightly before she then wipes us out. There is a way that you can drastically improve the life that we have, so that even the remainder of our days on this planet as a species, which I don't know how many years that would be, but it's going to be a significant amount if we did it properly. It would actually be itself already free from the most amount of stress and in the most amount of comfort and ability to sort of survive.
I just want to jump back into like the number 3 on your day. What do you do with your money? Who do you bank with? And what would you recommend a Zeitgeist person to do with the money?
Oh, I can't tell people what to do with their money. I quite like the idea of going for cooperatives or going for sort of what is called an ethical bank. Now, you've got to be honest with yourself. Since you are still of course, in the monetary system, your hand is essentially forced by what you do. If you can exchange with people, so you can say, for example, look, I'm a drum teacher, I'll teach your kid drums if you clean my pool because you're a pool cleaner. That's kind of good.
And not pay VAT as well.
Exactly, well, there is that. But again, the cooperatives and sort of those sort of non-corporate moneylenders and sort of bank things are slightly better. They're, I suppose, the best of a bad bunch.
I just noticed 2 things when you said that. One is to buy local and not support the Tesco's of the world, the Waitroses of the world. And one is, to use a cooperative bank that might not have all the shining bells and whistles that a Barclays would have. And I also think one thing, Nick, when you buy your iPhone, when you choose to buy an iPhone, do you not take responsibility for the fact that they're employing people in China to a certain extent? Or do we not go to Waitrose because the food is so fucking awesome there? And, and because the mom and pop, they have these old radishes and you're like, I don't really want those. So isn't it a little bit hypocritical in that we do make actions, we use our wallet every day?
Yes.
And yet then we complain about these corporations not being X, Y, and Z.
Well, if you think about it, what the real complaint is not against those corporations particularly, but against the fact that any choice that we have is still within a very horrific system, and that it's very hard to act very well. But there are ways that you can do this. There are ways that certain people have done it, I think, without even noticing. There's a great website called Kickstarter. Do you know it?
Yeah.
Just launched in the UK. Crowdfunding, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's very much like Indiegogo as well. There's a few others.
Just launched here, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
In the UK, yeah.
There was a guy who designed something called a printer bot, which is a 3D printing machine. Very simple, so average Joes like me can use it. And it's essentially so you can manufacture 3-dimensional items in your home. You can print off a clothes hook, you can print off toys. Now, that doesn't maybe seem like a massive global solution. However, think about the fact that you can now locally, ultra-locally, produce your own goods that you would be getting from a hardware store otherwise. How did those goods get to that hardware store? Well, they were driven there in giant, great lorries that burn fossil fuels from carriers from maybe China. That's a vast amount of energy you're using. This guy who produces a printer bot, I think it's $250 to get one, is essentially circumventing a huge amount of energy loss that way. So I think ultimately the big changes are going to come from innovations that don't appear to have the effects that they are, having sort of consequent effects on the existing systems that we then no longer need to use.
Well, think how many trees have been saved from being able to send an email as opposed to mailing a letter across the world.
And lives as well, because you get the information much quicker.
What about the guy in China who loses his job because he can't make your plastic toy?
Well, you're now touching on something very important,
Okay.
which is that the general trend in society, in modern society, is now towards a sort of a jobless world, mostly jobless world. There was a book in '95 that talked about this very well called The End of Work by Jeremy Rifkin, who's an economist. He's one of the few economists who really talks about this. It's called technological unemployment, and it manifests itself in multiple different ways. One of them is, for example, that 3D printing technology is essentially an automated factory worker. It's also the automated lorry driver, because you're no longer using him or any lorries whatsoever. And it has this sort of effect. But there's also the general move towards automation in the face of having to drop prices and become more competitive. And if one corporation automates, for example, McDonald's automates its cashiers into sort of touchpads, which they've already started doing in France and in certain areas in Britain as well, and in America, and which actually increases during times of economic hardship. So just as people need the jobs, you're actually getting rid of a great many of already pretty terrible jobs. Automated checkout desks in supermarkets, for example, are now absolutely standard. No one's surprised. Everyone knows how to use them.
I love those things.
Oh, they're great, aren't they? They're great. Oh, I don't have my human interaction anymore. Yeah, but they used to try and just ignore you and beep the thing anyway. And because they were beeping, that's already an automated process too. They used to put the actual numbers in themselves. So that's also on the rise, and that's going to happen anyway, because that's what technology really is. That's what automation is a robot or a machine or a cybernetic system taking over what people used to do manually. Of course, now agriculture is almost completely automated. We have about 1% of the population now work in agriculture. It used to be almost everybody.
You know, Brian, I get the feeling like, tell me if I'm right or wrong, but you don't really, would it be correct in saying that you don't really believe that there is a problem with the incumbent systems, like the global economic and political systems, or do you? What are your thoughts?
I don't think it's perfect by any means, but I also see things that capitalism brings. You know, all of our iPads and iPhones and things like that, and all the innovation which we love. And so, I have a hard time when everyone points the finger and says corporations are horrible, because it was the original limited liability corporation that allowed all of these countries to grow, you know, back in the 17 or 1800s when American capital was invested in British companies. Because, I mean, just to clarify what a limited liability corporation is, I mean, if you go buy a share in Apple and it's not a limited liability corporation, then if it gets sued, then you get sued, and you can lose all of your money. I know that's an extreme example. But I just have a hard time with a lot of these conspiracy theories. That's why I like what Ben is saying a little bit when he says the economy is built in such a way that it rewards people for bad behavior. Maybe it doesn't punish people enough, like corporations and banks and things like that.
Well, I mean, if you think about the nature of a corporation, is it's not accountable to anyone, and it solely exists to generate profit. So
that's fine. You know,
is it though? Because let's say a decision has to be made over whether to expand a shopping mall or build a shopping mall in a new area that will destroy the habitat of some species of waterfowl, right? Some like weird goose or duck that, like, once it's gone, once that area is destroyed, it's gone forever. We'll never see it again. Our kids will never see it. The corporation
is that like 99.9% of all the
corporation will always choose profit, and
we'll try, and that's why there's so many national parks in America. It is our job to try to regulate that, and then you can go back and say, well, the money always wins, and that kind of thing, and that's when you lose me, because I do think there's a place for regulation.
Let me.
What do you think, Ben?
Let me present you with something that might change your view about how capitalism produces things like iPads.
I doubt it, but I'll listen.
That's fine. Yeah, I don't want to have to convince you or indeed your listeners. I'm just going to convince myself. The behavior of technology predates and outdates and runs counter to the trend of capitalism, or the trend of any different particular system, in the most fundamental way, which is that, for example, let's wind all the way back to the Cambrian explosion, right? The first time when we suddenly had lots of different types of animals on the planet, all within very few 100 million years. That happened because nature had developed RNA and then DNA in order to be able to essentially have the information to quickly assemble what had sort of come about by the sort of Darwinian mechanisms that we now understand, right? There's no longer the need to reinvent the wheel every time. Literally, you can now suddenly have a sprawling mass of new animals based on this DNA, this shared DNA.
It's a good thing I'm not stoned, because that would have totally fried my brain.
Well, we can do it later. It's fine. So what happens then is, of course, the end, not the end product of that, but one of the byproducts of that is human beings come about, right? We develop a thumb, which is a form of technology that allows us to interact with tools differently to the chimp. We then gradually have stone tools. We then invent things like books.
Voice was big, right? Voice was big, right?
Voice is a big one too, yeah. The small mouth noises that I can make that tells you to go over there and get me that thing, exactly. That, of course, allows us to also start developing particular ideas, and those particular ideas can be solidified into things like books. And the Gutenberg press comes along. Now, every time that there's a new level of something, you can essentially plot it this way. Every year that humanity goes forward, we know twice as much as we knew last year, because we use the existing technological systems to
It's a very
generate.
subjective thing to say.
No, I mean, we know in terms of, we can measure it in multiple different ways. Number of megabytes of information that we have about the human brain doubles every year. The size of a computer shrinks by a factor of 2 every year as well.
18 months, I guess, according to Moore's law. But
But Moore's law is speeding up, and so are all of these
is.
other things. We're now actually faster than 13 months for knowing things. But what's happening is this is sort of determined by the prior level of technology. Having wheels allows you to design other stuff quicker, and then
We're on an
those
exponential curve.
Yes,
I mean,
exactly
there's no
right.
doubt about it.
Exactly right, and that's how we've got to iPads. Not because someone was paid to make money off the idea of an iPad.
But if we were the Soviet Union, I don't think an iPad would have been created, because there would have been no profit, and
good
Steve
point.
Jobs would have not wanted to do that.
Yeah,
Maybe
but
I'm wrong, actually.
That's okay, because I mean the reason that the Soviet Union fell was the, again, exponential increase of information, so that they could actually look outside the Soviet Union through this telemachines and see what was going on the outside. That brought about this.
But would the government have created a machine to compete with another machine and
Well,
make
they
it
did.
better?
I mean,
or would it just be
Soviet
Aeroflot
tanks-
over and over again?
Soviet tanks during World War I and II were just as good as everyone else's, weren't they? I mean,
I'm talking about like an innovative consumer product that they can make a profit.
Okay, in terms of innovation, let's look at it this way. There are many examples in history of where innovation has actually been met with blind prejudice and disregard, and on one side, for example, battery technologies being bought up that are much better than the incumbent ones, bought up in terms of patents and then just sat on. They just don't bring them in because it's a disruptive technology that would make existing systems quite obsolescent and make them unearning. So even though there is some benefit to be had with the idea of competing for making a better this or that, or indeed a cheaper one, which means it's worse.
But I mean, the socialist, communist, Soviet structure, I know I'm being general, but I don't see them innovating products. Can you argue with that?
No, but I'm of course not into their ideas either.
Okay.
The idea of
You see my
an
point,
equal,
though.
yeah, I see your point, but is product innovation, is that necessarily a good benchmark for any society or like standard of living? I'm sure we have loads of iPads, but iPads and things like your Nespresso machine or your frozen margarita maker or whatever, but does this necessarily mean we're becoming happier people? And
That's a whole nother issue, obviously.
Well, it all interconnects. That's the thing, is that this focus on blind consumption is being marketed as what makes you happy.
That is
and
true.
if that isn't true, then take these pills. And
Is
all that.
Zeitgeist about that? Is Zeitgeist questioning why we consume?
Yes, mostly. Not mostly, but a significant portion is to do with consumption, because consumption also comes down to resources. And the kind of resources we're using that make, for example, iPads, it's unfair to pick on Apple. Let's pick the Samsung Galaxy. Those are things that regenerate extremely slowly. And because we build them so cheaply as to make the most amount of profit and make them, at least sellable to the market, we then also make them so they don't really break down or can't really be recycled in a truly efficient way, in real recycling terms. We throw those down things into landfill. Or we sell them to a company who then strip a little bit out and throw the rest into landfill.
The thing that I keep coming back to is we're part of the natural world, right? We're animals at the end of the day. Now, if you look at nature, there is no waste. There's absolutely no waste in any ecological system. If a fox in the forest dies, it's decomposed by bacteria and put back into the system. And look at us. I mean, the waste we produce is staggering. Every week, or even more often than that, every few days, I have to empty this big black bag in my apartment and I put it outside my front door in the bin. So where does that go? Where is that going?
Well,
dude?
why are you throwing it away? I mean, you complain about your behaviors,
dude,
though.
I'm part of the system. I'm not saying I'm perfect.
Then why are you I don't know. Where's your solution?
I don't
you
have
put your
one.
money where your mouth is every day.
But I want one. I want like one that will help me to be able to not have to do that. But yeah, I want to go buy my box of eggs from Sainsbury's because it's cheap and they're there all the time, But there's got to be a better way.
There does have to be a better way.
It has to, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are various ideas that you can tout about how we can improve things like packaging issues, for example. Imagine if anything that came in a particular box was that box itself was absolutely optimized for downgrading, so it uses the least amount of resources, rather than if you bought a kid's toy recently.
And all the plastic. And all that
man, it's actually significantly hard to get the things out.
You can actually cut yourself getting it open. Even Jeff Bezos was like, "Yeah, it's ridiculous."
Exactly. Now this is done because it's cheap, not because it's good, and it uses a bunch of stuff that's not downgradable. You could solve this issue if we all got together. We have the information and the technology to make this stuff way better, but we also live in extremely large, outdated cities that would need ground-up rebuilding, or at least some sort of significant transition. And it's extremely hard to do that when you have a divided society where there are different areas of expertise that don't really talk to each other. That's changing now. We are becoming a little bit more interdisciplinary. But we also have countries which are the age-old byproduct of old localized scarcity systems, and the borders just sat where they could after a significant to and fro of power structures and all the rest of it.
Do you think that perhaps what I feel, Brian might agree with this, is that things like Zeitgeist, although noble, what they're trying to do is fundamentally flying in the face of human nature. Like Brian always says that we are naturally lazy, we are naturally greedy. Is there enough time for us to rewire what a human being actually is?
Okay, the human nature argument's a good one, and it was actually the reason that Peter started his third film with a significant treatment on human nature. So what do we mean by human nature?
Just that what human beings, all other things considered equal, will naturally revert to or naturally gravitate towards, or the actions they will naturally take.
Okay, so if I were to tell you that there's a tribe called the Buid that are absolutely non-violent and actually abhor the idea of heroism as something that's rather bleak and weird, would that fit in with your idea of human nature?
Maybe they're a rarity, an anomaly.
Well, the fact there's an anomaly means that we have to ask...
Are you saying it's been taught in human nature? Is that the point you're kind of making?
I think that... let's put it this way, and I can only tell you what I've read from the people that I've read. There is such a thing as greed. However, the word greed immediately makes you think of people just taking money and doing anything to be number one. But that originally was actually aspiration. The drive that sends humans to know and invent and become better, like self betterment, and indeed a lot of things like betterment of others. That's altruistic stuff. I think is all part of that same drive. Something inherently wrong with the acquisitive nature of a human being, not just for things but for knowledge as well. That's really what makes us human. I think that's really that's why we have all this stuff, right? So those kinds of things actually need to be refocused, and we do talk about a sort of a shift in values. It's not just about sustainably upgrading with the best technology, the transport systems, the sewage systems, the communication systems, and all this kind of stuff, and health and all the rest of it. There has to be a value shift as well, because at the moment the whole point is that we are based on a competitive mentality. We're based on a divisive and owning and mentality, whereas we could actually, if we understood what it means to live in a finite system that is essentially pretty wasteless, that does have a high amount of regeneration. What does that mean for how we behave? What does that mean with things like altruistic behavior? What does that actually mean? Might it mean that if I had the idea that what's good for me is actually what's good for everyone, that having a clean water source is an important thing because I need it and other people need it, and if they don't have it and I do have it, that actually makes it quite dangerous for me to be around them, because it's, again, dividing us, and there's a jealousy thing involved and all the rest of that. So we sort of come to a crossing point of sustainable and sensible technologies that can be revised, that can be improved, and also a value system that is happy with upgrading and being proved wrong and being outdated, and a new sort of a focus on what it means to have a human relationship with others and the whole planet as well. So it's very much a mixed bag of all of those things, because one informs the other, and they both inform each other. And I think that's where most of modern human nature comes from. If you had been born in a very different circumstance, you would not look the way you look now, you would not sound the way you do now, and you would not hold dear the things you hold now. Those are all not inherent.
Those are taught, you're saying. Well, so as opposed to if we lived in Avatar. Like, I think if we live in Avatar, then everything is like very different. It's a community. It's about the nature. Everyone respects the nature, and that's how everyone's brought up. So
And
that's what they do.
did you see how people left that film as well?
They got killed.
There were stories.
Oh, I mean, the Avatar people got killed.
Yeah, that's right. But there were people coming out of that film in America depressed at the fact that they are now so divided from nature.
I believe that. Well, yeah.
Really unhappy. And what was the difference? They were shown an alternative. They were shown a type of life that no longer shares what is a basic fundamental truth about humanity.
So is that what the Zeitgeist wants to be in a certain way? The Avatar community?
Well, not really, because
Why?
because it's very hard if you were to say
It's a romanticized ideal, right?
Yeah, a romanticized ideal of flying birds and we're all blue and we connect with our hair.
But some of the basic values are what you're talking about now: buying local and not making waste.
Well, an
and some
Earth
of these
system,
things.
yes, if you like.
I mean, that was a resource-based economy, right?
I suppose it would be. The only thing is that it's very dangerous if you say we want what's in Avatar. That people go, "What, you want me to live in a mud hut and stuff?"
But
we actually think you can take all that wonderful technology with you and still have that connection.
Is it not just as dangerous though to not be able to? Because I can't tell you what the Zeitgeist movement's about, and I'm always wondering: is it not dangerous not to be able to say this is what we're about in 20 seconds? Not that you want to say we want to be Avatar, but sometimes I have a hard time getting my head around the movement itself.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, there was a chap yesterday who asked me what it was on my T-shirt, and I said, and I always struggle because
And it says One Planet Project,
One Planet
right?
Project, the Zeitgeist Movement. That's right. So, and I said, well, look, we're essentially a movement that wants to. Yeah, you see, it's actually quite tricky. I do it differently with every different.
You want to make the world better,
people.
ultimately.
We say that we face particular crises in education, in energy, and in employment, and we think that we can actually put science and technology at the centre of society to create a truly humane society for everybody on the earth, to provide the basic resources that everybody requires, nutrition, all the rest of it. And that we can only do that by really all working together and getting rid of this sort of competitive model that we've sort of had inherited down from prior generations. It's about as short as I can make it.
I sometimes wonder if there's planets or worlds in the solar system or the galaxy or the universe where they've just got it right, where there's no war, there's no poverty, there's no hunger, things just work
Avatar.
smoothly. Yeah, no, I mean, I wonder if there's places like that in the universe. I mean, I hope there are.
There was a really interesting, I'm not into UFO stuff, but there's been a single story that I've read that really caught my imagination. And it was partly because the teller was such an interesting guy. There was a chap in the 70s, I've forgotten his name now. He goes under the name of Stefan van der Erde, which means Stephen from the Earth, which is what these aliens called him. He had this vision. He's a Dutch banker, right? It was like really high up in a company. He had no prior interest in UFOs, and he didn't even have interest in UFOs after this happened to him. And the story he told was that he was approached in this sort of sequence by these aliens that had come from another planet. And they just basically explained to him how they build their spaceships, how they work, what their cities look like. And then they told him that their religion was efficiency. And that's about as short as maybe I could make it with the Zeitgeist movement, that we want maybe the new religion to be efficiency. The thing is that it's not a religion in that sense. It's that if we maximized efficiency in absolutely everywhere, you would end up with such a big abundance that people would have way more stuff, even though you wouldn't be on an ownership model anymore. You would actually have so much more in freed up resources.
That's very interesting.
And so much more in truly, truly modern teaching and real learning, lifelong learning and all this kind of stuff, and not putting a human being, which is an incredibly complex, brilliant, pattern-recognizing algorithm, into a fucking factory job where they spend 20-odd years only there because they have to earn money to buy the shit that you tell them you need. This is really about as much as you can do it.
Yeah.
And
That's
maybe
very
I'll
Tyler
use that.
Durden.
Were you recording?
Yeah.
I hope you were. Yeah.
That was a great last 2 minutes, because now I kind of getting a feel for what you guys are doing and what
That's
you're
what
talking
it is.
about.
I mean, that's what it is.
Because it is very Tyler Durden. I mean, working jobs we hate to buy shit we don't need.
Yeah.
That I get. That I recognize as being the problem with
And that's
the
you, dude.
consumer
You're
culture.
the efficiency guy.
I love efficiency, and I'm staying away from consumerism more and more as I get older. And I get it now.
Which is crazy because you got all the cash to buy this shit that,
that
no one else does.
I've been going from like crazy capitalist to now like looking around. But anyways, speaking of capitalism, capitalism. We are sponsored by On It Labs Alpha Brain, and Ben is actually taking one, and look how brilliant he is.
Jeez, that's why it was
It's all the Alpha Brain, man. I've got nothing.
When he got here,
He's
he
usually
was
a
just,
mongoloid. He was like, dude, we gave him Alpha Brain and he came up with this crazy stuff.
that's
right?
smart.
Wow.
So, and Nick just popped a couple, so that says enough there. But anyways, if you want some Alpha Brain, you can go to onit.com. That's ONNIT, and if you use the customer code LondonReal, you can get 10% off. Also, Shroom Tech Immune. Nick and I are big fans of the cordyceps mushrooms to help you bust out those kettlebell workouts and get mean.
That's
like,
why Brian's got such
like a
big
beast.
guns.
Yeah, that's where the guns come from.
So one of my guns are very small.
You're just covering
Just
them
haven't
up.
got onit.com yet.
It's something we talked briefly on the phone about, and I wanted to ask you, how did the Occupy movement interact with Zeitgeist, and ultimately, how did that work, and how were they different in mentality than what you guys were doing?
That's a really good question. There's actually multiple answers too, because of course, look, there's a nice synergy between the two movements. The very end of Zeitgeist Moving Forward features huge numbers of people on foot marching towards the banks and throwing all their money at it and basically putting it in a big pile and burning it and going, we don't need this anymore. And 8 months later, Occupy...
Burning the banks or burning the money?
No, burning the money. Just go, well, I don't think they even burn it. I think they just throw it and go, we don't need this anymore. No thanks.
It's that same thing, I guess.
And then 8 months later, Occupy did the same thing after Adbusters released their thing, going, listen, we're gonna occupy them like they occupy the Gaza Strip. And so what happened was that appeared. Then we had a few of their guys on the radio show, people who were sort of coordinating the New York one as well, just to give their perspectives and saying, what is the end game, how is it going, and how are you managing to be leaderless and all that kind of stuff, just, from one movement to another, how's it going sort of thing, and offering sort of a general solidarity. I went down to Occupy London a few times with big bags of food to just, keep their massively abundant kitchens overflowing and listen a little bit to they had free lectures and stuff. It was really wonderful
This is
stuff.
at St. Paul's, the first
Exactly,
camp.
yeah,
What
that's
actually
right.
We went down
happened?
there.
It just when all was said and done, what happened to the Occupy movement? It just fizzled, right?
Finish.
Well, yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. And then, so a lot of our members went down there. There was sort of a tent there. Now, in some places, we actually organised the Occupy things, and it was very clear from the start that we had done. So the guy from Zeitgeist Amsterdam helped organise Occupy Amsterdam, and anybody who wanted to occupy came along there. In most of the cases, we were just there to sort of address them or speak with them, or at least get some of the ideas going. And a lot of them actually also rejected us, and they said, oh no, we don't know any of the conspiracy stuff. They really only saw the sort of very prima facie sort of associations you get from looking at our stuff for maybe 5 minutes. And they didn't want to talk to us. In which case, fine. We're not going to push ourselves on anybody. The whole point of this movement is, here's our train of thought. And it's based on what we try and be as rational about as possible, right? And if you've got anything that you can prove incorrect about it, that means it's an improvement in the ultimate goal of what we're after. We're after it being correct. And we can't force you to live in this system or to advocate it. You have to understand it. And if you don't, there's nothing I can do, all right? I can only do my best to tell you what it means. And that was true with Occupy too. There were some ones that got it straight away, understood that it wasn't just the evil bankers, and that it was actually the systemic issue of banking itself, as it is now playing out in sort of modern needs scenarios. And there were some people who didn't believe that. They just thought it was the nasty bankers, the sort of the Daily Mail type of people. And you can do your best to present them with information, but you can't try and force them to do anything. And then what happened with Occupy? Well, it went for a long time, considering that it had no resources. The guys actually in St. Paul's did some cool stuff. They had a technology tent where they were pumping out Wi-Fi, and they had a generator and all that stuff.
Yeah, we went down there in November.
Yeah.
It was early days, maybe 4 weeks in.
That's
right.
our third episode,
And
right?
checked it out. Yeah, we just walked around, talked to a few people. Very little interaction, but it was a decent setup. I think it was also before kind of the bad elements came in, whatever that means. I know it's tough when you do a movement. How do you know who to let in?
Exactly, and that's in fact where the American Occupy went. If you saw it, I mean, you had Occupy Oakland, I think it was, with that idiot, just that campus guy spraying people with pepper spray. You had Fox News saying, "Oh, don't worry, it's just a kind of food, isn't it? It's just a food." And you get the sort of
Occupiers was spraying it, or one of the
no. There was a
campus security,
a campus security guard. I think it was Oakland. I'm sorry, Oakland, if it's not true. And he just sprayed all these non-violent protests who were just sitting on the ground with a lot of.
But isn't that wonderful news for the movement? Isn't that wonderful news for Zeitgeist?
It's
great.
Yeah, because
Press.
you see what the incumbent system does.
Right.
We often get accused with the idea that this sort of system that we advocate would end in violence. And that's only true in the following way. The current system will happily use violence against anybody proposing a non-violent system or in acting in a non-violent way.
Violence only flows down. Right?
Exactly. And the absolute proof was that all of the when the occupiers in America, in New York, actually put down their definite demands, they said an end to the Delaware corporation functions. You know how that works, yeah? Where they all are just headquartered in Delaware so they can get around all the tax, which means that all of those wonderful profit-making corporations in America that are touted as being the reason the system is so great are in fact not contributing a significant
liability issue, I think, in Delaware as well. I think.
There's all kinds of things, but I mean, they no sales tax, no income tax, all the rest of it. He said no more of that. Get the money out of politics. You know, lobbying equals whoever has the most money gets to choose which environmental laws they get to ignore. Right? Get that out. And they had 3 or 4 other very definite ones. A couple of days later, out come the truncheons and the and all the rest of it, and they shut all those people down. It was like, no, thank you, we're not having that conversation. So what happened to Occupy? I would say they succeeded.
Right.
I would say they succeeded.
Because they got people thinking, I guess.
Yeah, and they're still around. They've now become a sort of a buzzword. Like you can now say occupy the media, occupy journalism. And there is this sort of way, and I think that's true of Zeitgeist too. I mean, first it was films, then it's a movement. Ultimately becomes a set of attitudes towards being able to critically evaluate everything around you and being aware of that. I think that's part of it too.
Occupy really branded themselves really well.
Yeah.
You know, that whole word, and the 1% as well.
Yeah.
That was
We are
pretty
the
strong.
1%. In fact, Lawrence Lessig, the American former copyright lawyer who now is trying to battle corruption in the American legal system, I think he's doing it the wrong way, but it's very great that he does it because he's brilliant. Look him up if you can. Lawrence Lessig, really, really good. You should get him on the show if you can. He said it's actually mathematically inaccurate to call them the 1% because if you look at where all the money is, it's really like we're the 99.993% or something like that. It was just
that is true, actually.
It's so much more. But yeah, I mean, you go for the sort of the simple, no one's going to remember, we are the 99.993.
I mean, I talked to people in London about Occupy. I talked to everybody, you know, anybody I could meet, and they all just had a hard time figuring out what they were about. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know the action, which I guess part of what they're doing was just kind of occupying. And I know people, they weren't frustrated, but there wasn't a message. I know even you, my liberal friend, you were like, well, what are these guys doing? I don't understand.
And we got that impression too. And look, it's really hard when you have a deliberately leaderless movement. You have something that tries to be as open as possible.
Which is what you guys are as well, right?
Yeah, you have to work very hard to try and form a common message that everyone's happy with. And you have to also realize that not everyone's going to be happy with it all the time. And that you're as happy as possible with trying to update that as well. But I mean, for example, one of my friends who's in a different movement called the Molecularists, he went over to Oakland, California and met them there. He lives in Berlin, he went over. And he said the way that it was failing and it was going to fail was that there was this weird tall poppy syndrome thing where anybody who stood up and spoke automatically was decried for trying to be a leader, even if they were just trying to make themselves known about something.
Because it goes against human nature, right? I mean, like...
Well, there's that buzzword again.
Yeah. So I have one question. How do you guys fund yourselves?
Independently, man. Like I for example, whenever I travel anywhere to do a talk, I fund my own costs on the way there. I write my lectures on my own computer.
I thought you were going to say recycled toilet paper.
Yes, I do. I hand them out on recycled toilet paper. This lecture has been used 8 times before. So yeah, I mean, it's self-funded essentially. We don't have a bank account.
Wow.
We don't have any money really. We're just, and I'm lucky enough that I have just about enough that, for example, if I'm being asked down to Petersfield in August for like the Little Green Gathering. It's like the Green Party have a gathering. So they said, well, do you want to talk? Do you want to have a sort of an interview and do a lecture? I was like, sure. I won't ask them for anything for going down there, even though it's the other side of the country from where I live. Okay. Because it matters to me that I can go there and do it without money intruding on anything. And for them, I mean, they've given me a free ticket, okay. They've done that, but I mean, I think that's normal. But anything like that, for example, if we go and fly festivals, I buy the tickets myself. If we're traveling, last year I traveled to the Media Festival in the States just to be there. I bought the tickets again. So those of us who can do it off our own backs.
What's your relationship with Peter Joseph in the States, and how do you interact with the creator of the Zeitgeist Movement, and is he still involved in the movement?
So I met Peter for the first time, I would say in April 2010, it would have been, yes. He was over here, and we had that big shutdown where all the flights weren't working anymore. So he was stranded here for a few days. So I had a couple of drinks with him. And
the volcano that shut
That's right. That's right. So that was like the first time I met him. I'd emailed him a few times before. My emails to him are like one line. They're like, hey man, do you want me to do this? Or hey, have you seen this? That's it. You don't write long pages of nonsense. No one's going to read it. And of course, he's very busy, and so am I, so I don't really have time for it. But I mean, you know, we talk very briefly, I would say once every couple of weeks via a 3-line email, something like, do you want to do this week's radio show? Because we have a radio show on Blog Talk Radio. That's about it, to be honest with you.
Okay.
There's no need for anything else. There's no need for lengthy phone calls or anything. What are we talking about? We know the inherent logic. We know we have recommended reading lists, so we're all telling each other what's kind of good to read. And
Imagine if a company were run like that, Brian.
Yeah, but what if someone goes off topic, or what if he gets a new idea and wakes up and says, I believe this, and then you're over here saying something opposite, and then you're like, wait, we didn't talk, or...
Well, I mean, the wonderful thing with the word belief is that you can then say, well, what is the rationale for asserting that particular viewpoint? Because maybe it would be right. For example, recently there was a article by George Monbiot, I think his name is, in The Guardian, saying peak oil was rubbish, and we've got lots of oil, and we'll have enough for all to fry in it. Right? His angle was actually having a lot of oil is even worse, because the devastation and pollution is not going to go away by not having enough oil, or having enough of it. And we started discussing, saying, well, how does this actually change what we talk about then? The thing is, ultimately, hydrocarbons still are completely unsustainable, because they, as far as we can tell, they don't regenerate except over millions of years. Which, by the way, if you worked out what that costs in terms of how much you should be paying, you're paying like $1 million a litre, because it takes so long to regenerate. But we don't do it that way. You can't sell it that way. So we then said, well, does this have an effect on our argument? And what's the evidence? Most importantly, who's going to read the MIT report and go through it and make sure it is correct? And if then, how do we change how we talked about it? You know, do we need to revise anything? So we try and remain open-minded to that too. If anyone turns up with things like free energy machines, where they go, this machine, you just turn it on, it could go forever, right? That runs against the standard model of physics, right? And it's very unlikely that that's true. But we will at least look at it and go, well, is there any actual evidence for this? And most of the time, the sites you go to are trying to sell you this thing for $50 and don't explain how it works, and that is inherently unscientific. So that kind of stuff gets shut down. We go, sorry, this is just the age-old idea about a free energy machine. That kind of stuff is filtered out. But we try and remain as open as we can about other stuff.
You know, we've got a bunch of questions from people, but I think we should just round off this hour, and then I'm just going to do an extra 20 minutes of questions for you. But just briefly, if people want to get in contact with you, I know one of our guys, Adrian Flavin, said, how do I start my own Zeitgeist community? You know, he's in Ireland and stuff. So if you can just briefly answer those questions, and then we'll get some more questions later.
There is a website called tzmchapters.org, I think it is, which actually comes with templates and with guides. There's actually a new chapters guide being written now. It's about 50 pages long, that can give you an idea of how to go about doing it. We even do, website templates and stuff. We originally used to host all of them, but that's changed. So there is actually step-by-step. If you can't find it, my email is ben.mcleish@thezeitgeistmovementuk.com.
And if they want to follow what the Zeitgeist Movement's doing, what is it? Is it the TMZ site?
Yeah, not TMZ.
Sorry.
That's the people who take pictures of
TZM.
Of Coney 2012 guys naked.
I don't spend time on there. I really don't.
No, one guy from our own Facebook actually called it TMZ multiple times in one question. I was like, you need to proofread. But yeah, I mean, what's the best place? We do have a Facebook. The best place is probably the zeitgeistmovement.com. We also have the zeitgeistmovementuk.com.
Okay.
And we even have a London chapter as well.
Okay.
But the good thing about the main Zeitgeist side is it filters in from outside. We have like a related website for news called like zeitnews.org, which is just all the amazing developments that we've done. You know, no commentary about alternative social systems. Just look here, we've worked out smart materials. This is what we can now do with hydrogen, just over and over and over again. So you get a fill-in from that for just to show what we can do. Latest news from us, latest radio shows from us and where they are, latest videos, latest, if there's a lecture tour going on or if there's like a media festival coming up, it's all brought in there. So it's quite a useful place to start. And then you can go to the local things as well.
Awesome. That's some great resources. We're going to have you on for another 20 minutes to answer some questions. But Ben, thanks so much for coming.
Yeah, Ben,
I could tell from the start this was going to be dope.
Well, thank you very much. You had some
right?
good questions.
He was dropping
I thought
some
it was pretty
knowledge.
dope as well.
He was quite literally dropping some science.
It was, right?
Yeah.
So we got some questions coming, but we're going to say goodbye for now for our iTunes people. And thanks for coming on.
Thank you for listening, guys. Thank you
Cool,
very
man.
much.
Until then.
Welcome to London. From city we come from. London town and we go play the Eden sound now. We go party all night long.
Sun is shining and you know we gonna feel good. Come on everybody, party in the neighborhood. Eden nights, let's check out.